Thanks for joining us at BIV Today, the daily podcast from the Newsroom of Business in Vancouver. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief. Our podcast today is sponsored by the province's largest law firm, Fasken, with more than 800 lawyers and 10 offices in Canada, the United Kingdom, South Africa, and China. We held our annual CEO of the Year awards ceremony on Monday, and we're all in such a good mood still that we thought it would be a good idea to get together, talk about some of their leadership styles, their advice, and their experiences in recent years. Let me introduce three of our five winners, five of our winning CEOs who need actually very little introduction in the community. Ryan Beatty is one of the most prominent industrial and residential developers we have, the CEO of the firm that bears his surname. He's also an extraordinary philanthropist, making commitments, well over $100 million to a variety of community good works and to education. Paish is the CEO of the federal Digital Technology Supercluser, which has in 3 short years developed roughly 1,000 partnerships to advance the interests of Canadian firms in that wide-ranging sector. And Dick Vollet is the CEO of the St. Paul's Hospital Foundation, helping to finance arguably the most significant addition to our province's healthcare system, in at least a generation. Good to have all three of you here.
Thank you.
Well, let's start off. Ryan, give me a little bit of a sense here about the grounding that you had in developing your own leadership. Your father was, of course, an extraordinary influence on you. And what other influences did you have in order to craft your own value system?
It's a great question. I mean, he obviously had a significant role in my life growing up and into adulthood. In fact, when I was younger, I had somewhat of a challenging relationship with him. I think I was not the easiest teenager to get along with, but as I grew older, he had a big impact, and he just impressed upon me so many significant values and ideas that he would sort of drive home. And I actually sort of lived in almost a healthy fear of him, but he had a big impact. And every day I still think about those messages and trying to impart them onto my team. But my mom, for sure, I always felt my mom was a very compassionate, caring person. Not that he wasn't, but he had this sort of aggressive, sort of strong-willed side, and a very understanding, compassionate sort of approach she took with me, almost too much, where I could almost do no wrong in her eyes, or a lot of times I deserved to maybe be in trouble, and she would make some sort of excuse for me. So I had these sort of countervailing, different sort of opinions. But my parents, a big influence. I've got 3 half siblings from my dad's first marriage. My older brother Colin, just a totally wonderful person. So growing up, those people would have been a big influence over me. But as I mentioned yesterday, I think as an adult, YPO, Young Presidents Organization, my YPO Forum group, we were together for 20 years, and you meet every month with these people and form a very strong bond and sharing, the deepest, most personal, intimate things. There's a lot of growth that came from that. I've always been, in my life, I try to surround myself with really smart people and just sort of pull a little bit here from the different people that have I've been fortunate to connect with.
Nice. Sue, help me understand how you crafted your own values, where you think they were derived, and how they've adapted.
Yeah, thanks. And a lot like Ryan, my parents had a big influence. My parents were immigrants from England, so we were the first generation Canadian, and we had no family around us other than the Super Six, as we called it, my 2 sisters, brother, and my parents. And there were 2 things that happened that really shaped all of us. One was my parents' determination to make us familiar with every corner of the province geographically. So when everyone else was holidaying in beautiful cabins on Lake Okanagan, we were pitching tents in Telkwa in northeastern BC, learning how to smoke fish, or we were traipsing around the grounds that are now the W.C. Bennett Dam. And we felt totally disadvantaged as teenagers and as children doing that. But in later years, we realized just how lucky we are that none of the 4 of us could say we haven't been to every corner of the province. So that was one thing. The other thing is, because we were alone here as a family and all of our relatives were in England, my parents thought it was important that we at least try and spend some time in England, getting to know our other relatives. And my situation was a little different from my siblings in that my grandfather died when I was 9, leaving my grandmother as a widow. And my parents thought it would be a good idea to put a 9-year-old on a plane by herself in April 1968 and send me to England for 2.5 years, with no connection with my parents or my siblings. This is before internets or emails or anything like that, 68 to 70. And you grow up fast. You learn how to fit in, you learn how to adapt, you learn how to be independent. And I think I've carried that with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Geez, I thought my mother putting me on a streetcar when I was age 6 to go to the Beatles, to go downtown, was a bit of an abandonment, but 2.5 years, that's a long time. It's a long week. Dick, let's move to you, because I worry that this could be a little therapeutic here if we're not careful. About what your value systems owe themselves to in terms of influences.
Yeah, thanks, Kirk. And, for me, I won't go as far back as my childhood, but I did have some strong role models. My grandmother was one of those interesting women who, spent her life in a house dress and, cooked great soup. And I used to come home from school every day and eat too fast so I could get back and play floor hockey with my buddies. So my grandmother instilled a lot of really good work ethic skills in me. But, go fast forward, I was lucky enough to spend 20 years at London Drugs working for 3 generations of the Louis family. So I worked with Tom Louis and then Brant Louis and now with Stuart. So, I really have a lot of good things to say about that family and some of the things that I learned growing up in the business world, in the for-profit world, working with them. And then the other big role model I had was the time I spent on the Olympics working with John Furlong. He's just one of those guys that, when you sit in a quiet moment with him, whether it's, on a plane flying somewhere or just even, I was lucky enough to have the moment to spend some time with him, was just talking about his leadership philosophies or his attitudes towards how he behaves as a leader. And they just aligned with me and who I am. And I think, Ryan, you alluded to it yesterday in your talk was, it's hard to find people these days in leadership roles that'll do what they say they're going to do. And that's one of my fundamentals. When you said it, it just resonated with me. It's, it's very, very rare you can find people in leadership roles that will follow through on what they say they're going to do. And that's one of my founding principles.
I'm going to ask each of the 3 of you to name a name of somebody who you think you've influenced, or that you feel like your imprint has been really brought to in your work, that you can look back on and say, I actually, that's somebody that I think I really helped. I helped in the way that I was helped. Ryan, do you have somebody?
Oh, a few come to mind, and I'm
you're gonna have to pick one.
I've got one. I've got it. But hopefully he would agree with this. And it's I'm somewhat reluctant to say it, but Charles Chang, who's become a good friend of mine. I remember one of the first times I met him, he was talking to me about our donation, our investment in the Beatty school at SFU, and he was saying how awesome it was and how one day as he grew his business, he would hope to do something similar that was really inspiring for him. And lo and behold, a few years later, he sold Vega and developed the Charles Chang Institute of Entrepreneurship at the Beatty school. And, I'm like, wow, like it's humbling to think that, some of the things we've done have actually inspired others. And those were his words. So I think that we had a positive impact on Charles and his philanthropic giving.
Yeah, that's great. And Sue, you've been really for 4 decades somebody who has led and led and led. Who do you feel like you led best to the best outcomes?
Well, I don't know if she'd say this, but a young woman named Joby McKenzie, who I met when I was at Life Labs, she was a young advisor from Boston Consulting Group that Life Labs was using. And I sat down with her over coffee to talk about an assignment that we had for Boston Consulting. And within about 15 minutes, I thought, I think I want to hire this person. And how do we do that without making Boston Consulting Group very unhappy with us? Anyhow, we did end up hiring her, and she and I became fast friends. She's quite a bit younger than me. And so she was raising her children. My children were already adults. And this woman jumps over tall buildings in a single bound. She's been on the women's basketball team. She's got two PhD honors degrees all the way up and down. And yet she didn't quite know where she wanted to go with her career. So we spent a lot of time over coffee, walks in the park, me babysitting her kids when I was in Ontario. It wasn't a formal mentorship type program. And she ended up being the Canadian president for Babylon Health, and then moved on and is now the Canadian president for a huge multinational called Teladoc in virtual health. And so I've just watched her grow from, sort of a recent grad, albeit a PhD grad, into a major leader and community inspired, great parent and role model for herself. And we're still fast friends.
That's a great, proud story. Dick, do you have somebody that you pick out of the hat over the number of years?
Well, it's interesting. I got a little bit of time to think about it because, like Ryan, I've mentored a number of people. I hope in the right direction. I hope, but I have two wonderful boys. My oldest is 37, my youngest is 35, and I got to say, I hope they would say this, that they've learned a little bit from me along the way. And my oldest son is a fairly successful individual with the Oracle Group. He works in the software industry. He's fantastic. He travels the world and loves doing it. And my youngest son has two of my favorite people in the world, my granddaughter and my grandson. It's great to see your kids become parents. And he's also very successful in the tech world. So I'd like to think they both got their work ethic from me. They definitely got a sense of humor, not from me probably, but they're both great young men.
The life of a leader, I've heard, is not always an easy one, and is also one that has a little bit of solitude about it, in that it's hard to share beyond your family what is really going on in your world. Let me get a bit of insight from each of you about how you actually manage to confide somehow, or find sources of some kind of support that, without having to burden your families every night that you come home. Ryan, where generally do you find that? And you don't have to name names here, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think you're absolutely right. I was thinking about it this morning. I've got some meetings today where I'm going, okay, I'm going to potentially have to sort of play a bit of a devil's advocate role and take positions that might not be very popular, and then sometimes you have to do that as a leader. And I don't want to burden my family, although they're very supportive. So again, I'm very fortunate in my years in YPO. I've got a very strong network of people that I can draw upon, and I'm a very open person generally, and I connect well with other people in the network, and I share my experience, they share theirs, and be able to tap into a broad knowledge base and get from people their experience of what they've done, not necessarily giving advice back and forth, but just sharing experiences and learning from that. I had that today. I mean, a call this morning to someone, say, what's going on with this? What do you think? And again, I'm very fortunate to have a pretty strong network of people who will give me sort of the unvarnished truth, and I would do the same for them. So I'm very fortunate that way.
That's nice. Sue?
Yeah, I've been intrigued listening to Ryan talk about YPO because I'm part of a group that is kind of sort of like YPO. And let me just put it into context. 20 years ago, it was really hard for someone like me to get into YPO, i.e. a woman. In fact, I tried twice. And a person who reported to me was admitted to YPO, but I was not. So it was interesting. And what was even more interesting was some folks in YPO, some guys, put a forum group together with the mandate of having it gender balanced. So this is 21 years ago. And we're still together, and they've brought in a lot of those values that you've talked about, Ryan, from YPO into our forum, which is nothing, no one, never. So you can share everything knowing that it's a lockbox. The thing that they've done for me, though, over the past 20 years, that has really helped me in my career, and I'd say in my life, is to understand how to be forceful without being unkind or bossy or mean. And in particular, when I was being interviewed for the job at LifeLab, or not at LifeLabs, at PharmaSave, they put me through a mock interview. And I'll be honest, they made me cry because I wanted to, be the team player and all this. And I remember one of them saying, you got to put your darn hand up if you want the job. And really instilled this sense that if you want to be a leader, then lead. And make sure that people know what you stand for. And so I've relied on my forum members for personal, family, business issues for the last 20 years. And I honestly don't know where I'd be without them, because you can't take it home all the time to your family.
Oh, that's great.
Awesome.
Dick?
Yeah, it's good. I've got two groups I belong to. One, and they both feed different parts of my need. The one is the McKay CEO Forum. I belong to McKay for over 10 years now, and I just the group has changed and evolved, but I really get a lot of value there, and it's a nice cone of silence. The other is a group called Legatus. It's a group for Catholic leaders in Vancouver, and there's some again a forum group that I belong to that feeds that part of my need. And it's again, like you, Sue, it's a group of people I've been with for over 5-6 years now, and I don't know if I could get along without them, for the simple fact that my wife would probably kill me if I brought everything home to her. So yeah, it's great to have them.
I want to ask about the kinds of advice that you give people now, because you're likely asked every day for this and that and the other, and you would be much in demand. You probably have emails that back up all the time, phone calls that back up all the time, appointments that you are overlapping throughout the course of the day. And I want to understand a little bit about how much you see your roles as advanced and as secure as they've been, to now share advice with people and spend time advising people, and doing that as part of your work, and largely what your focus is when you're providing advice. What do you feel your best advice is to people? And what lane do you try to get in and stay in all of this? And Sue, let me start with you on this one.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm gonna go back to the mid 70s when I worked at General Motors, and I thought I wanted to be in labor relations, employment and labor relations, when I was in business school. And I had a really interesting boss at the time who said, okay, well, if you want to be in labor relations, let's put you in labor relations. And at the age of, I guess, 18, I was the first woman to ever work on the floor of a GM factory, an assembly plant. We were in the fab plant, as a labor relations advisor. And mostly men in the fab plant didn't know what had happened, like what was this creature in there. And so I learned a lot of things in that experience for myself that I now use when I'm talking to others. And one is a sense of purpose. A lot of times people ask questions that are about what, why, what, when, who, how fast. And I know I drive my own team somewhat crazy, although I think they've adapted quite well, is before you get into all of that, let's talk about why. Let's talk about purpose. Somebody phones and says, I want to get on a board. I get those calls a lot. I want to get on a board. Okay, why? Tell me why. And it's really surprising how often people struggle with that question. And so whenever somebody seeks guidance from me, how do I have children and still be a career-oriented woman? How do I advance into the C-suite? All those kinds of questions that you get. Why do you want to do that? Because purpose is a really important thing for me. The second thing is instilling in people the importance of being vulnerable. We're human and we all make mistakes. We all wish we could put the words back in our mouths well, at least I do. Maybe the rest here on the phone call don't, but I wish I hadn't have said that, or I wish I'd done it differently. And so being vulnerable. And then the third thing I try to live my life this way and suggest others do is remove the word should from our language. It's an incredibly judgmental and devastating word. I should have done this. I shouldn't have done that. And it goes hand in hand with being vulnerable. So those are the three things. I'm a really purpose-driven person in everything that I do in my life. And I think purpose kind of evades us a lot of times when we live in the world that is as compressed time-wise as it is now. And then being vulnerable, we're human, and never should yourself. I actually learned the should part from my forum group. Don't shoot yourself.
I should go to Ryan next, but I'll go to Dick.
Thanks, Kirk. It's a great question, and I'll go back in time too. I'll go back to when I was on the Olympics on the Vancouver organizing committee for the 2010 Winter Games, and one of the things I learned there very quickly from a lot of people was, just to not to be afraid of anything, because fear creeps into most of our lives at different times, and you kind of wonder whether you can do certain things. And we always knew they were never going to move the opening ceremony date of the Olympics in 2010, so we had to get it done. And there was there's 3 or 4 big files that landed on my desk as VP of venue operations that tested everything. But what I learned there from a leader in that time was to make sure I took care of myself. And what I meant by that was like physically. I needed to turn off the phone at 10 o'clock and plug it in and not turn it on until 5 o'clock the next morning, which was the regular routine for 5 years. And that sounds quite simple, but a lot of times the technology these days is so invasive. And so I make sure I schedule time to go to the gym, simple things that you take for granted. But what it does is it allows you to clear your head. It allows you to take care of yourself. It allows you to make sure that you're physically and mentally willing and able to do all the things that we need to do on a regular basis. And then, it's take care of yourself first. Make sure, you take your vacation, you take the time you need. It's not a badge of honor. No one's going to give you an award for not taking your vacation at the end of your career. But you need to take care of yourself. So that's one of the things I try to tell people.
That's great advice. Ryan?
Yeah, I'm fortunate. I get to spend a lot of time with students through the Beedie Luminaries program or Beedie School at SFU, and I love spending time with students. And I'm often asked, different questions, and so there is opportunities do arise to give advice. And I've got a few sort of things. My good friend John O'Neill, he always said, "Good things happen when you show up." So show up, say yes to things, and be open to experiences. I'm all about relationships. Our business is totally based on that. I was thinking today, coming into this and then seeing Sue and Dick yesterday, we've had very limited interactions over the years, very limited, but I recall them. I remember talking to Sue on the phone 10 years ago. It was an awesome conversation. So when I see her, I feel like I know her, even though I don't really, but there's a comfort that comes from that. So I think just being open to new people and new experiences, it's really important. But back to the values issues we were talking about before, especially for these younger people coming out, being honest, being true to your word, say you're going to do something. You want to be the kind of person that someone can count on, that they can rely on. When they say they're going to do something, they're going to do it. So that personal brand, that reputational capital, I think is always, invaluable. But this day and age, I think it's critical. And it's something that I try to impart on the people that I'm speaking with.
I'm going to ask, as we kind of conclude here, I'm going to assume you like your jobs more during the pandemic than you did before the pandemic. Every executive so far I've spoken to says there's something about this crazy upside down world over the last 20 or so months that has actually taught them a lot. But I want to get that from you about what you feel that has taught you about yourself and how that learning, if you want to call it that, has made you enjoy what you do a bit more. Dick, can I start with you on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Kirk. And being in healthcare, I think I get a little bit closer to the issue, being COVID, than most. And reading the daily reports, or how many people are in ICU, and it comes closer to home. So for me, I think the one thing I really learned is I learned to be. I always thought I was empathetic as a leader, but I learned to be more empathetic as a leader to people's needs and the fears that are real to them, that are not real to me. So just understanding where people are at in terms of a pandemic and what impact that has on their life. So not being as judgmental, being a little bit more empathetic, and just being willing to meet people where they are around something as critical as this pandemic and everything that goes with it.
It's nice. Ryan?
I think it's a great answer. Empathy is one of the words that came to mind for me. I think, we go about our business day to day, and we've got a lot of employees, a lot of people that sort of rely on the leadership here and on myself. But when everything kind of hit, it's like, okay, it's, time to step up. And I love my job before, but I, in some respects, loved it even more because I want to be there for my people. I want to be there for the team, whatever they need. Let's do whatever we can to support our people. We kept our sites going. We kept people working, even though you're going, okay, who's going to buy these buildings? Who knows? So I think in some respects, the challenges that it brought maybe have brought out the best in me. And I was, I gotta say, I was kind of proud of myself and how I handled things and how the leadership here did, especially during the worst times of the pandemic.
Yeah. Hope we don't have to do this one again, though, do we? Sue.
Yeah, so three things. First, and I'd say foremost, is really appreciating that critical balance between family and work. Being at home, we closed our office back in March, and we're sort of back now. But for a long period of time, I was working from this room, which is in my home, and my husband stays home. And I will say that when I was at the office and he was at home, I kind of wondered often what he did all day. And I'd come home and what did you do all day? Because he's retired. Being at home, I have a whole new appreciation of how hard it is to have 3 adult children who rely on you a lot, and a big house and community engagement, and really, really appreciated the role of family members that stay home and take care of the rest of us. So that was one thing. The second thing, we have a very young team in the supercluster. Most of them are under 30. And seeing how they experience the pandemic, very different from us. Many of them live in teeny tiny apartments with no outdoor space, or they live in a basement suite, or they even live with parents or grandparents. And so staying at home for some of us was kind of cool at first, unless you live in a teeny tiny space that you're sharing with 2 roommates, and the uncertainty that the pandemic brought, and the fear and the bombardment of social media and no escaping from it. So it really helped me appreciate that how I experience the world is not how everybody else experiences the world. And I'm never going to forget that. And it really drilled into me the importance of understanding everybody has their own experience of whatever the item is or the issue is. And then the third thing, sort of the counterpoint to that, is the agility and the resilience of the human spirit. It's a little bit what Dick was talking about and Ryan, in terms of empathy and caring. But I looked at this small group that we work with with very young people, and just saw them lean in. When we were called by Ottawa in mid-March of 2020 to do something to help COVID, we kind of looked at each other and said, well, what did you have in mind? And the speed at which this little group of mighty people came together, and the results that we got from that is just remarkable. But watching us work together in a totally uncertain environment for the betterment of Canadian small business really was really heartwarming. So those are 3 things.
Those are all great. And it's been a great conversation. We could go on for a couple of hours, a couple of weeks. We pull a marathon here, but I'm appreciative of your time, and I don't want to overtax it. But I want to thank the 3 of you for your time, and congratulations again for being some 3 of our BIB CEOs of the year. And we'll see you again. Sue Paish, Ryan Beedie, Dick Vollet. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Kirk.
You've been watching BIB Today. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief. We'll see you again.